given by property rights. Okay, so it's often a good element to consider. Who has not only property and wealth and income, but who has the rights under the legal structure with which to benefit from all that stuff? And again, when we look at income and wealth, although this chart is really hard to see, we're just pointing out the same thing from our first chart in this lecture, that wealth is unequally distributed between the different quintiles. Again, this is between groups of 20%, 5 groups, 20%, based on how affluent each is. The second element of inequality is occupational prestige. Okay, so first we had property, and second we had occupational prestige. And what this chart, it's in your textbook, so you could check it out. It is table 7.2 in the text, chapter 7. Is it has a list, and it gives a prestige score based on the occupation. So at the top of the list we have a physician, and the prestige they have in society gives a calculated score of 86, a high score, a lot of prestige. Under the physician is a lawyer, then a university professor, an architect, and each of those has about, where the physician had 86 prestige points, the lawyer will have 75%. The university professor will get 74. So they have a relatively high amount of occupational prestige, of status that they get as a result of what they do in society. So if you think about it, when you go to a club, you go to the supermarket, you meet somebody for the first time, what is the first, after you introduce yourself, what is the first question that you ask? What do you do for a living? Why? Because again, this is one of these things that our society values, trying to see what type of person is this, what type of status does this individual have based on their occupation. Okay, so at the top we had physicians at 86, at the bottom we have janitors and shoe shiners with 22 and 9 prestige points respectively. So if you meet in a bar, one person says, oh, I'm a shoe shiner, the other person says, I'm a physician, they immediately come to some sort of judgment about that person as a result of the commonly sort of implicitly understood notions of social status and prestige in society, how we stratify different groups in society. So there are generally 4 elements associated with occupational prestige. The first is that jobs that are more prestigious, that you have a higher level of status for, they pay more. This often comes with the assumption that the jobs that pay more and have a higher social ranking require more education. Okay, so the job of the physician, which we assume has 86 prestige, the highest perhaps position on that chart in terms of status and prestige, we assume that the doctor gets paid the most in our society. Okay, and this is an element. The more you get paid, the higher the level of prestige is. But we also assume that to become a doctor, to get that status, to get that paycheck, they also had to perhaps sit in 7 to 9 years of medical school, or more, depending on what type of physician they are, what type of field of medicine they're involved in. The third element is that the jobs that have the most prestige also pay more and require the most education. They also require more abstract thought. Okay, so the type of positions where you have more advanced theoretical, critical thinking, analytical problem solving that is required, where these individuals have to call on their higher education. Their years sitting in some university somewhere, writing papers, sitting in the lab, doing whatever they do in order to train themselves into the manners of more abstract thought. And as a result of this, because they are handling more abstract thought that they've used their education to do, they require a higher payment to a certain extent to make sure that they handle these jobs appropriately, because these are complex, abstract problems that perhaps there cannot be one concrete solution. So in order to make sure that these individuals do a good job in their roles, we must pay them more money. And finally, the fourth element of occupational prestige is that these jobs offer much greater autonomy. The ability of individuals to choose to do whatever they would like to do in their working role, or at least have freedom from some sort of overarching authority. So perhaps where the school teacher, who has a lower level of social prestige, respectively, compared to a physician, will have, again, the vice principal, the principal above them, the Ministry of Education determining the curriculum which they must work with, and everything is standardized to a T. The Minister of Education, for example, who would be one of these jobs which has a higher pay than a teacher, requires more education, and it would involve more abstract thought in terms of policy development. The Minister of Education would have a lot more autonomy in terms of what they can do in the education sector than the teacher. Okay, so the element of occupational prestige, these four elements that we are discussing here, can generally be applied to most hierarchical positions in most industries. Okay, the more they pay, the assumption, or the higher the prestige, the assumption is that it pays the most, it requires the most education, entails more abstract thought, and there's greater autonomy in the role for that individual to use their abilities, and the incentive, obviously, of the payment to handle their role appropriately. It's also important to discuss various symbols of status, because generally you can see that people who are coming from particular prestigious or areas of the class system that has a high level of status attached to it will often demonstrate their authority in certain, or their status, I should say, in certain mannerisms based on the clothing they wear, perhaps where they decide to live, in a gated community, on an island, who knows. Okay, the specific educational diploma obtained. So perhaps you might run into some individual in the supermarket and they talk to you in the most abstract language possible, using big words that nobody can understand. You might assume, this person is trying to communicate their status to me in some way. And generally, as again I mentioned, research has shown that ranking occupations by prestige is consistent over time and across cultures. That means that each culture or society will assign some sort of rank to what they think are the best or the most important jobs in that society. Okay, so we're going to stop there for today. We're going to carry on discussing the sociological approaches to stratification in terms of our theories. This is not really zooming in at all, but that's okay because we're done. So I will see everybody in class on Friday, and I appreciate you bearing with the video lecture. again for the second time. All right, we'll talk to you soon. If anybody has any questions about the content of this lecture, we'll clarify it in class on Friday, or feel free to send me an email and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Okay, that's it for now. Have a good one.